Well, one of the things that I found when I'm working on my doctorate and my dissertation is I'm very focused on doing research on how to make organizations more profitable, especially in this environment where product is becoming more commoditized. So what I did is I came up with this model, basically taking the fundamental S-curve that we all learned about in marketing class, everybody knows about, we've talked about it in business meetings. The S-curve was a traditional curve used for product innovations and product changes. And basically what it does is it follows the traditional S-curve where as new products come in, they become profitable, but then they reach their maturity and then they go down. Well, we can take that S-curve and now apply it for profitability also on corporations. There's been a lot of research done on corporations and how they traditionally follow that S-curve also. But what I've done with the traditional S-curve is I've added these lines here called profitability. So basically when your corporate strategy is brand new, you have low profitability, and as you go up, it becomes higher. And then, of course, as you reach maturity or your product becomes more commoditized, it becomes low. And then what I did is I added a line called propensity to change. This line is very interesting because if you look at most companies that are brand new, our competitors that pop up out of nowhere, they're very lean organizations. They have very little hierarchy, very little bureaucracies. They're not set up with all these management structures that we have in a lot of large companies. And they're very agile, and they can change at any point in time. So as their strategy begins to kick in, they can be very agile to move based on the customer's needs and wants. And the higher up you go on the propensity to change line, you can see the more profit you make, the larger the company becomes, the less likely you are to change. So what's interesting about this is that as you're less likely to change, as the organization's growing, this red line is people. Basically, as we grow the company, we begin to throw people at the process. And we begin to throw people at the process in order to satisfy the customers, not really looking at do we really need those people, but we need those people for a short-term problem that we're having today where we can't satisfy all the demand that's coming in because we're growing too quickly. But there reaches a point in time where when our product becomes commoditized or our corporate strategy no longer is valid, we need to begin to re-innovate and change the direction of the organization and take what our products we have and add new features and functions and abilities to it. What happens is that we then begin to decline our profitability. Well, as our profitability begins to decline, what we begin to do then is lay off people. As we lay off people, the way traditional organizations go is that after 2 or 3 layoffs, if we're not becoming profitable again, what we do is we begin to change the CEO out. Now, there's some frightening statistics in the U.S. I didn't look around globally, but in the United States, in the Fortune 500, in the last 5 years, 60% of the CEOs have changed over. The other thing is that in the United States, tenure of CEOs is less than 3 years. So what is 3 years where it used to be 5 to 10? Well, what's happening now is because we're becoming commoditized, our propensity to change is low. As we begin to cut costs by laying off because our sales revenues are down because we become a commoditized environment, what happens is the board of directors changes out the CEO. It must be the CEO's fault. So then a new CEO comes in. He tries to reset the corporate strategy, and he comes in, resets it, but then we continue to have cost-cutting measures by laying additional people off. And what happens then is that after 2 or 3 sessions, we end up changing the CEO again after about 3 years. The reason for that is because the strategy never kicked in. Well, this is the basic philosophy of how a lot of companies kind of go through their changes today. If you do a lot of research on the organizations today, and a lot of organizations that are in a commoditized business, you'll see that there are those CEO changes, and you'll see that there are those layoffs. Now, the reason why I began researching this is because as CEOs change out, what we're doing is we're now digging down into new layers of CEOs and there is no global CEO training program. It's basically, you were trained by the CEO before you and so on and so on. So as we dig down, many of these CEOs who end up leaving after 3 years now become consultants or go off and run other businesses on the side, but not necessarily become CEO again. And they may have been great CEOs, but what's happening behind the scenes is this is the part that Dr. is on, and it's very interesting to look at, is it's not necessarily the CEO that is the issue. What's happening is that you have the corporate strategy that is set by the board of directors and the CEO. And we continue on these cycles of reducing costs, which is the right thing to do. As our revenues, we're trying to get them back in line and change our commodity business. But what we have is this line called inertia. Inertia is ran by the management of the company. This is the management of the company from the next level down, all the way down to the lowest level of management, which is what we call the business strategy. That is a common term used throughout the world. You have the corporate strategy, and the business strategy is actually the operational rules used to run the business. Well, what's happening is that even though there's new CEOs coming in, the actual business is still being ran by the managers behind the scenes using the business strategy. And until that business strategy changes, basically a CEO can come in, and then end up continuing down this path until finally a company is either merged, bought out, or basically goes out of business. And how many companies do we know of worldwide that have been in this same mode where they're a commoditized business and then they end up getting merged or bought out by someone else because they just can't change that corner, and when in fact the whole thing is directed by inertia. So as organizations and executives in organizations, especially the service organization, this is a very interesting model, because what happens is that we all heard of economies of scale, revenues exceed costs. But as we go down the other way, it's called diseconomies of scale, where costs exceed revenue. And this is one of the biggest things to try to be predictive on how do we be predictive, not change out CEOs, not disrupt the organization so much, try to avoid layoffs as much as we can by not hiring as many people and throwing people at processes as our product is growing and commoditizing, and how to stay out of this negative cycle that a lot of companies tend to get into by focusing on inertia of the company. Now, if we look at consulting makes millions of dollars on companies that are in a commoditized business. Their profitability is beginning to shrink. The CEO, the board says, we need consultants to come in and tell us why we're not working right. But again, what's happening is the CEO brings them in, the board brings them in, and then what they do is they align the consultants to a level of management, and then the consultant goes out and tries to figure out what the problem is. But the problem is it comes back to our propensity to change. At this point, you can see it's low. Therefore, anything that the consultant recommends usually isn't taken as Bible, and that's the way we're going to do it from here on out. Many of them will take in parts and pieces of what the consultants are finding, and then there are other pieces that we're ignoring. So basically what this model is key to the next parts of the presentation. It's called the Economies of Change model, and it's something that is fundamental to many organizations.